Direktorat Penilaian. Go global, go stronger. Mantap. Yes. Do.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera.
Waalaikumsalam.
Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Yang terhormat Direktur Penilaian Direktorat Jenderal Kekayaan Negara Kementerian Keuangan, Bapak Arik Haryono, Direktur Pengelolaan Kawasan Konservasi Kementerian Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan, Bapak Jeffrey Usyafrianto, Kepala Balai Taman Nasional Gunung Halimun Salak, Bapak Irzal Azhar, Kepala Subdirektorat Standarisasi Penilaian Properti dan Sumber Daya Alam, Bapak Hari Sutarmin, dan Bapak Rahmat Kurniawan. Selamat datang di webinar Natural Capital, Valuing and Promoting Sustainable Protected Area Tourism to Benefit Local Communities, atau neraca sumber daya alam, di mana kita berusaha mendalami bagaimana pengelolaan sumber daya alam dapat menguntungkan masyarakat sekitar. Acara hari ini akan dibuka oleh Direktur dari Kemenkeu dan KLHK, serta dilanjutkan sesi presentasi dan diskusi. Setelah itu akan ada sesi diskusi termoderasi dan penutupan dari Bapak David Kacan, ekonom senior dari Bank Dunia. Untuk memulai acara, izinkan saya mengundang Bapak Arik Haryono untuk memberikan sambutan. Kepada Pak Arik, waktu dan tempat dipersilakan.
Terima kasih, Naris. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. In this event, I would say special thanks to Bapak Jeffrey Susyafrianto, Director of Conservation Area Management, Directorate General of Nature Resources and Ecosystem Conservation, Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And also, I would say thanks to Urvasi Narain, lead economist the World Banks, and Kubi Spencer, environmental economist the World Banks, Edward Taylor, Professor, Department Agriculture and Resource Economic, University of California, Davis, and also Mr. Irzal Azhar, Master Rahmat Kurniawan, and the moderator Mas Hari. And special thanks also here we have Justin Kegins and my best colleagues, Mr. David from the World Banks. Greetings of excellence and may peace be with every one of us. Dear distinguished guests and colleagues, first and foremost, I extend my sincere and warm welcomes to each and every one of you to this highly anticipated webinar. It is an honor to gather virtually to discuss of every interesting topic. This is a natural capital about the importance of valuing protected area as Indonesia state asset. Our discussion today combines the perspective of economy and also environment within protected area, and we will share each other insights on how to maximize and optimize the economy and environment aspect to protected area. As we know that state asset is not merely just state owned asset, or we call it BMN, barang milik negara. Rather, they encompass beyond protected assets, as they also including natural capital. That's why we are blessed with the abundance of natural resources in Indonesia. But the real question is how can we manage them and optimize their potential to increase a community, especially for prosperity, while safeguarding the balance of sustainability. This is where value comes to play. And my personal, always I mentioned what this in webinar before about my favorite quote from the Peter Drucker, right? Who said, if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. That's why unless you can measure of something, you don't know if it is getting better or worse. In the context of managing protected area, we realize that our measurement is best represented by the economic value of the area. Without adequate information, of course, about the value, we cannot make informed decision on managing the area. Knowing the values give us a brief yet broad understanding about the condition and also importance of the protected area. It allows us to make a multiple management scenario and assess their impact and trade-off not only at the local level, but also within a broader national context. Furthermore, value is also important tools to help policymakers in especially the fiscal policy development on taxation and also subsidy. In the Ministry of Finance, we hope that the natural asset value and ecosystem services value can be accounted and integrated so that the fiscal policy can align with our goals of sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, the valuation of protected area need collaboration with the multiple stakeholders as part of our effort to pursue this vision. So today, bring you a webinar on natural capital, the importance of valuing protected area as Indonesia's asset. So on this occasion, let us engage in the thoughtful discussion and explore idea for further valuation. With an unwavering commitment to a more prosperous Indonesia, I extend my heartfelt wishes for the success of this webinar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih banyak Bapak Arik. Selanjutnya, sambutan akan diberikan oleh Bapak Jeffrey Susyafrianto, Direktur Pengelolaan Kawasan Konservasi Kementerian Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan untuk memberikan sambutan. Kepada Bapak Jeffrey, waktu dan tempat dipersilakan.
Terima kasih Bu Naris. Kedengaran nggak suara saya Bu Naris?
Kedengeran Pak.
Oke, terima kasih. Honorable Director General of State Asset, Ministry of Finance, Director of Valuation, Minister of Finance, Pak Arik Haryono, Senior Economist of Environment, Natural Resource, and Blue Economic Global Practice, World Bank Indonesia, Bapak David James, Representative of Coordinating Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Investment, Representative of Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Representative of National Statistics Agency, and Representative of National Development Planning Agency, Representative of National Park Management, and a participant of webinar. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning and the best wishes for all of us. Firstly, let us express our praise and gratitude to the God Almighty that has kindly given us health and opportunity to meet webinar in Natural Capital online meeting. On behalf of Directorate General KSDAE, I would like to convey many thanks and appreciation to World Bank for the opportunity given to join this great event. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as you might know, Indonesia is one of the largest archipelago countries in the world. 63% of our land area, which equal to the 120.6 million hectare percent as forest area, and the rest is other uses area. Directorate General KSDAE manage and supervise 168 protected area with a total area of 27.4 million hectare, comprising 22 million hectare of terrestrial and around 5.4 million hectare of marine protected area. Those protected area surrounding by 6,700 47 villages with 16 million number of people. Village community have the potential to become a nuisance or being supportive to protected area management. To shape a village community as supportive one, community empowerment activity are made to the development independence, welfare of the community around the protected area, and keeping the sustainable of the area. Those activities including community capacity building, conservation, village management, traditional utilization of non-timber forest products, facilitation of partnerships, natural tourism service business license, and construction of tourism hubs. Furthermore, to manage protected area, we implement various activities, start from planning, protection, preservation, and sustainable utilization, such as natural tourism, watersheds, and non-timber forest product utilization. One of the important activities in the planning phase is the recording of potential data and threats in the protected area. In several national parks, including Loser, Waikambas, Sabangau, Ujung Kulon, and many other parks have implemented smart patrol to record field data. Currently, the data recording are widely used for material in the preparation of documentation of the management plan, community empowerment plan, restoration ecosystem, and tourism master plan. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very interested and appreciate to this webinar, which will facilitate us to discuss the possibilities to protected area valuation. Currently, we need to develop protected area valuation, including the valuation of biodiversity potential resource and ecosystem. The speed of many assessment and researches have been made on this subject. Through this event, we expect identification effort or study of economic valuation method of conservation could be initiated. By doing so, we can plan effectively how the utilization, the economic valuation of protected area according to existing field data. Some of the benefits from understanding economic valuation of protected area are: first, the protected area can be part of the value of asset in the development of the area. Second, by having valuation assessment method, it will assess as the provide standard in measuring the potential of natural resource in protected area, or even damage assessment of area. Third, to support the conservation campaign of an area. And fourth, become a key indicator to measure the effectiveness in conservation area management. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen, we expect this webinar become as the best opportunity for a constructive problem-solving discussion. Particularly, it could give us better understanding and knowledge of the importance of the economic valuation of protected areas. There is apparently an urgent need to build capacity, raise awareness, and development framework and tool for valuation. Having correct information on economic value of protected area can be help decision-making tasks and effective implementation of policies that ensure the long-term sustainability of Indonesia ecosystem. Although there are a range of valuation approaches available, recent advances and techniques are meant to design to determine the potential for tourism around protected area. As the matter of fact, it is not all around tourism that we can economically benefit from a protected area. Finally, we also expect that this webinar will be the best opportunity for us to share experience, information, and knowledge so that we can develop better strategies to value protected area at the most effective way. Thank you very much for having me, and I would like to express sincere appreciation to all parties involved and jointly support this webinar. Thank you. Billahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Bu Taris, Pak Arik.
Siap, makasih Mas.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, dan terima kasih banyak atas sambutan yang hangat Pak Jeffrey. Semoga diskusi konstruktif ini bisa terus berlanjut dan bersama-sama kita bisa berkolaborasi untuk mengembangkan strategi menilai wilayah lindung. Sesi selanjutnya adalah sesi presentasi yang akan dipresentasikan oleh tim riset dari Bank Dunia dan juga University of California, Davis. Kepada Urvashi, Edward, Edie, dan Justin, waktu dan tempat dipersilakan.
Sorry, I was just looking for the button. Are you able to see the presentation? Okay, wonderful. And it's let me just begin by thanking Park Arik and Park Jeffrey for those for your opening remarks. It really helps put this presentation into context for us. We are absolutely delighted to be here. And I want to extend our warm welcome to all the distinguished participants. So let me get us started. Today we will share with you some of the work that we have done at the World Bank to understand the economic value that tourism in protected area brings to local communities. So just in the way of some context, although from the wonderful video we saw, as well as the opening remarks, in Indonesia, protected areas are seen as an economic asset. But this is not always the case in other countries, where protected areas are often seen good for conservation, but they are not seen as an economic asset, so they are often overlooked in economic development plans. And yet, we have seen some evidence, say, for example, from the US, that shows that protected areas can actually generate a very significant economic return for local communities. So in the US, for example, a $3 billion annual investment in parks generates a return of 20 billion annually for the local communities, the gateway communities, through visitors and through tourism. So it clearly, protected areas can serve as an economic asset that brings returns to the economy. However, without this kind of evidence that shows the economic return or the value, as was mentioned, of protected areas, it is, it's hard to make the case that government should invest in protected areas, to promote tourism in protected areas, and that governments really see protected areas as good for not only conservation, but also for economic development. And with this sort of background, we initiated this study to understand in a number of countries what is the economic value that protected areas bring to the local communities, so that governments can use that information, as was mentioned, to better manage this very important asset that they have. So with that, just to give you quickly the outline of the talk today, we will begin by explaining the methodology that we have used to sort of make this case for protected areas. After that, we will also show you how we are at the World Bank. We have been applying this knowledge to promote greater investments in protected areas, but also to promote use of this kind of methodology by a wider set of users. And then finally, we'll open up the question and answers. So we'll begin by describing, first of all, how this kind of economic valuation is done to estimate the value of protected areas, of tourism in protected areas for the local community. And for that, I would like to turn over to Professor Pierre.
Thank you very much, Urvashi. Can you all hear me? Great, and thanks to all of you who are here. It's a real pleasure and honor for all of us to be here and share these studies and findings with you on a topic that we believe is very important, and it's also very dear to our hearts. As Urvashi explained, the basic idea behind what we are doing here is how to conserve biodiversity and natural capital, while at the same time promoting economic development in communities around protected areas. And so conservation and economic development do not have to be in conflict with each other. They can be compatible and they can actually support one another. Each one can support the other. Protected areas can create economic value in nearby communities through tourism. And this is particularly important in places where protected areas are found in more remote areas, where incomes are not high to begin with. If economic value can be created there, that can be a very important part of reducing poverty and promoting economic development in countries. And so how does this happen? We have some pictures here to motivate this. These pictures were actually created originally for a study we carried out with the World Bank jointly in Zambia at 2 national parks. And so you see the African animals here. But how does tourism in protected areas generate economic value in the local economy surrounding the protected area? Well, first of all, tourists come to visit the park. And so here in the middle picture, you see tourists coming to the park. In the right-hand picture, you can see them looking at an elephant at this particular park. Each country has its own specific natural assets that people want to visit and observe. Urvashi, can you click forward on that? Great. And so tourists come to the park. In the process, they typically pay entrance fees. They may pay taxes. These are economic benefits for the government. And we have found that quite often governments think that this is the economic benefit from tourism to natural protected areas. But as you will see, the benefit, this is only the beginning of the chain of benefits that get created. So next. The reason that the benefits are actually so much larger than this is that there are indirect impacts. Indirectly economic value gets created. And we depict the direct impacts with black arrows here and the indirect impacts with red arrows here. So you can keep them all sorted out. And so what happens here? Households get wages and they earn profits from tourist activities when tourists spend money coming to visit a park. Tourists stay in lodges, they eat in restaurants, they might buy souvenirs and all of these things. So these are local businesses that benefit by selling things to tourists. And in the process, they create profits, they pay wages, and the local GDP, gross domestic product of the area around the protected area increases as households spend and as their income increases even more. So households take this income, they spend it in markets, in local stores, they create additional rounds of impact. And so, as they do this now, the local storekeeper, the person with the stall in the market and so forth, they are creating new profits and wages which flow back into household, and the circle continues and continues. Now, businesses also pay taxes, households pay taxes. These taxes now become an additional fiscal benefit for the government. So now the government benefits not only from say, the park entry fees that tourists pay, but now also from the taxes which households and businesses pay because their income has increased as a result of sales to tourists and sales to each other as they spend their income. What is done with this this economic benefit, the fiscal economic benefit to government? So government takes up this revenue. What might it do? It might hire guides. It might hire park wardens. It might invest in park improvements. It might also share some of these benefits that it receives from park entry fees, for example, with local communities around the parks. As the government spends these monies and this money and the park authorities spend this money, now households benefit again, right? They benefit. Why? Because the households that the guides, the wardens, the people working on park improvements, those households that supply those workers now get benefits in terms of higher wages. They may get benefits also in terms of shared revenue. So now there's yet a new circle of impacts now on household income. Households spend this income in the markets. Again, you get a new round of impacts on local business activity, local wages and profits, and so forth. And so you can see now how the red arrows are becoming much more numerous and actually much larger than the black arrows in this picture. This is really the story of economic benefits from tourism to protected areas is really a story about indirect impacts that add considerably more value onto the direct impacts that are represented by the black lines here. Now, there are also some potentially negative impacts on local incomes. Park rules typically limit some human activities, hunting, for example. There may be human-wildlife conflicts, which create costs for local communities. These are things that it is very important to take into account because they are inevitable quite often when protected areas are created. It's part of protecting biodiversity. And so one needs to think very carefully how to compensate communities for any negative impacts that biodiversity conservation might create, and create incentives for people in these communities to want to support this program of biodiversity conservation and protection, the creation of protected areas. So that was a picture to tell the story behind the models that you will learn about during the rest of this talk. Now, what we have done and been working on at UC Davis for a couple of decades now is ways of quantifying impacts on local economies of things like government development programs, climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, regulating natural resources, creating protected areas, even impacts of countries hosting refugees and refugee settlements on surrounding host country economies. These methods have been used for many different things. Here we are using them to understand the impacts of tourism to protected areas in terms of the economic benefits, the economic value that this tourism can create in local communities. And so how do we do this? We need to first collect data. Data collection is an important part of carrying out this kind of analysis. It's also, we believe, an important part or should be an important part of government development agendas and agendas to protect biodiversity. This includes surveys of tourists. To tell this story, to quantify it, we need to know how much money tourists are spending and what they are spending this money on when they come to visit a national park. We also need to know how the park authority is spending its budget. How much is it spending in wages that go to local workers, flow into those local households, and stimulate economic activity? How are the park entry fees being shared between the park authority and the government for other potential uses? Tourists spend money in tourism lodges and in local businesses, so we must also do surveys of those lodges and local businesses to learn how they spend their money when they take in this revenue. And because this revenue, wages and profits end up flowing into households, we must also do household surveys to understand how households are spending this money, because that is crucial to draw those red lines and quantify them in the picture that we just saw, to quantify the indirect impacts. And so here we have two last pictures in my part of the talk. This one is, you can see the black arrow here. In the middle, we have the protected areas and we have the tourists visiting them. Going off to the right here, we see a direct impact, the black arrow, where tourists are spending money on lodging, tourist activities, park entry fees, and so forth. Now those businesses, tourism lodges, and other businesses benefit, and they pay fees and taxes to the government, and park entry fees also help the government support the park authority to achieve biodiversity conservation. But now we turn to those red arrows again in this picture. And here you can see all of these indirect impacts that we just covered when we told the story. The park authority hiring guides, paying for park improvements, that creates income for households. The tourists over here on the right-hand side, spending money in lodges and businesses, which then pay wages and profits into households. The households then sending this money back into the local economy by buying goods and services from local businesses, paying taxes, another benefit to the government, and so forth. And so at the end of the day, one of the things that has really struck me very much about this research, this work, and I will end on this, is that we find consistently that most of the impacts of tourism to protected areas are not found in the tourist businesses. Most of them are found in businesses and households that are not directly connected with tourism. If you go to a community whose economy depends critically on tourism to a protected area, and you ask anyone in that community, even if they don't work for the Park Service or they don't work for a tourism activity, ask them, what would happen if the park disappeared tomorrow, if they no longer had that money? And they will tell you that the economy would go down if you lost access to all of that that economic value. And so, most of this economic value that we are able to document is through these indirect linkages, the red lines, connectors in these diagrams that we shared with you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn to Phoebe. Oh, and I see that Mateusz Filipski, my longtime colleague, has shared a file in the chat, which is the book that we wrote together about local economy-wide impact evaluation. And there's a website connected with that book called beyondexperiments.org, which you can visit if you want to. And if you really want to suffer, you can click on the chapter resources and see the actual models that we used for every chapter in this book. We are also more than happy to share with you anything you're interested in seeing from these studies that you're about to hear about. And so I will now turn the podium over to Phoebe, who will tell us about these 4 case studies that we carried out with in collaboration with the World Bank, using this modeling approach to quantify impacts and economic value created by tourism to protected areas in Brazil, in Fiji. Those were marine protected areas. And also in Nepal, Chitwan National Park, the very famous terrestrial protected area, and in Zambia, two protected areas, two national parks, South Luangwa and Lower Zambezi National Park. So with that, Phoebe, would you like to take over?
Sure, thanks very much. I am going to present some of the findings that we had from this study, actually. And so, as mentioned, this was across 5 parks, and it was looking at both the direct and indirect impacts of tourism on the local economies around these protected areas. Next slide, please. We found that the benefits that tourism brought to these areas were broad and also very helpful to the poor. What was interesting was, as you heard, we've been looking at both direct and indirect impacts. Direct might be when the tourism operators hire local people or buy local goods. Indirect might be, when the households spend wages or businesses spend profits that they earn through the tourism sector, and these dollars keep moving through economies, very local to the park. Tourism appeared to benefit the poor more when we looked at the numbers coming out of this study and saw that when we normalized the benefit shares by poor and non-poor populations, the income multipliers created by the tourism sector, the share of those per resident was higher for poor residents in all except 1 park. Next slide, please. We also found that protected area tourism was good for development and for conservation. As mentioned, in some areas, protected areas are really just seen as places of great conservation potential, rather than also a great economic potential or great tourism potential. This study proved otherwise. We saw, in fact, that the development impacts are significant. Tourism in protected areas generated these income multipliers, which meant that an additional dollar spent by visitors in these areas raised the incomes in the local economy. $1 spent by visitors raised incomes by anywhere from $1.5 to $1.9 across the 5 parks. As we saw, the income multipliers were greater than 1 in all of the cases. That showed that the local market linkages were strong. The local markets actually amplified the tourist spending, so that we saw that that money was moving around within the local economies. What was also interesting was that the multipliers were fairly consistent. This range from 1.5 to 1.9 is fairly consistent despite looking at very diverse contexts across the 5 parks that were studied. That shows that a healthy tourism sector can provide similar income gains, even if there's a large variation in the type of assets or the type of tourists or the amount that tourists spend, or the number of tourists that arrive. And so seeing that consistency was very interesting to us and promising for future studies as well. We were also interested in looking at the jobs that were created through tourism activities, both directly and indirectly. And you'll see the numbers below. You see hundreds to thousands of jobs created through this sector in these local areas. Beyond those numbers, the share of employment supported by this tourism sector in each of these was substantial. And this study accounted for jobs such as hotel employees or restaurant workers that are directly working with the tourism sector, but also thinking about those that are employed as a result of the increased demand for goods or services that were actually catalyzed by the tourism sector. So thinking about retail or services, or even something like agriculture or fishing that supports the sector, even though perhaps the person doesn't work directly with tourists or directly for the tourism sector. So bringing jobs and money to local communities strengthens the argument for greater conservation, as the natural assets that protected areas rely on serve as the main draw to tourists and clearly generate the significant impact on local economies. Next slide, please. So the return on public investment we found to be at least 6 times the cost to governments. Direct and indirect economic impacts of tourism on local economies generated rates of return between $6.2 and $28.2 for every public dollar invested. These economic benefits revealed a sound investment for governments to promote green economic recovery and to support sustainable development through protection and investment in protected areas. Next slide, please. Out of these findings, we came up with some policy recommendations in 3 categories. The first is to protect the natural asset. We know that protected areas promote conservation and attract visitors when they are well preserved, well managed, and enhanced so that they reverse degradation that can occur in part due to the tourism sector, but for many other reasons as well. To protect the natural asset, our recommendations include formalizing protected areas to conserve assets and reduce negative impacts, increase public investment in protected area management, build capacity of protected area managers so that they can better manage the parks, and to monitor visitors and impacts so that we have the data available to understand what those impacts are and to better serve both the tourism sector, the community, and in the environment and biodiversity within a park. Our second bucket of recommendations is to grow and diversify business sustainably. Tourism businesses meet visitor needs and generate revenue and economic benefits for communities, and that can be supported by diversifying tourism opportunities. The types of offerings around tourism, if they're too concentrated, might result in negative impacts on biodiversity or other types of environmental concerns for the park. And so diluting the negative impacts of tourism through diversified offerings can help offset this. Additionally, developing concessions policies that make sense for a local community and have good stakeholder buy-in and demonstrated economic benefits can help support a community's involvement in those economic returns from these protected areas. Finally, our last bucket of policy recommendations is to share the benefits. Sharing the benefits from protected area tourism with local communities helps reach development goals and incentivizes conservation. And that can be supported through the formalization of benefits sharing. So distributing benefits fairly by including the poor and disadvantaged groups in an area, both directly and indirectly, for instance, through employment or revenue sharing, can help with that. Strengthening income multipliers in a number of ways. So perhaps assisting households through entrepreneurship programs to have them enter the tourism industry, or by supporting business diversification, local linkages and procurement of goods and services. All of these things can help prevent the leakage of money outside of a community and keep it recirculating within the economy to increase those income multipliers even more. And lastly, mitigating and compensating for human-wildlife conflict can also help in sharing the benefits and reducing any negative impacts that come. And it also helps to build trust and reduce damage to communities and to wildlife. With that, I'll pass the virtual microphone back to Urvashi to describe how we apply this knowledge in different ways.
Thank you. I hope you've now got a sense from these presentations about how we went about estimating the economic value that tourism in protected area brings to local communities. Now, what have we done since we released this report? I wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse into that. So, for example, we have this kind of information that we have generated has helped to inform government investments in protected area management, because now the evidence shows that this kind of investment is not just good for biodiversity conservation, but it's also good to bring economic development to that local economy. So there's been a project, for example, that the World Bank is financing in Zambia, the Green, Resilient and Transformational Tourism Development Project, which has the objective to strengthen the enabling environment, to create access to resilient infrastructure and economic opportunities in emerging tourism destinations in Zambia. The design of that project is very much influenced by this kind of approach that my colleague just shared, that the money must go to protect and manage the protected area. It must go also to try and make that protected area more accessible, so both infrastructure to the protected area, but investment within the protected area. And then ways of sharing that benefit to the local communities, whether that's through sourcing of local goods or through skill development and employment in the tourism enterprise. More recently, project in Gabon to support the economic diversification through nature-based sector project is under development, which aims to increase the sustainable management of nature-based proceeds and private sector participation in the forestry and ecotourism sector in Gabon. Again, building on this information and following the logic of those three broad principles. We are also supporting now a process of building a tool that can both provide a rapid assessment of the economic value of tourism in the park to the local economy. This tool can help make the economic case for public investment in protected area management. It can help inform protected area management plans, because with this tool, park managers can understand how much economic benefit the protected area is bringing. They can, if they look at this across different protected areas, they can see, you know, if some protected areas are not bringing much economic value, why is that? This tool can be used to inform sort of planning, so that you know, more investments are directed towards parks that can then lead to greater economic benefit to the local community. This kind of tool can also help to design projects, because the tool will help understand what are the linkages between the protected area and the local community. Are the linkages strong? Are the linkages weak? Well, how can these linkages be strengthened so that more benefit can flow to the local community? And this tool is called Louis Light, and I would now like to request Ed Taylor and Justin Hagan to share with you an application of this tool that we have just completed in Uganda, working very closely with the Wildlife Authority there to apply this tool in 2 national parks to see what is the kind of economic benefit it's bringing and how can that economic benefit, the value to the local community be improved.
Thank
Great.
you.
Justin will be taking over at this point to share with you what we call the Louis Light tool, where Louis stands for Local Economy-Wide Impact Evaluation. We did Louis studies in the 4 countries at the 5 parks that Phoebe Spencer just shared the results from. The purpose of this tool, as Urvashi mentioned, is to come up with something that can be done more quickly than what we did before. And that's what we mean by a rapid assessment tool, something that requires less data and in which we can get some at least preliminary sense of what these linkages and multiplier effects of tourism to protected areas might be, and how changes in how those protected areas are managed and so forth might affect these linkages and create more economic value. And so with that, I will hand this over to Justin to share with you an oversight of the Louis Light tool that we have been working on.
Thank you, Ed, and I'm honored to be here in Indonesia, sharing this with you guys over Zoom at least. The Louis Light is a simplified version of what Professor Taylor was talking to you before. It's more rapid and it's cost effective, and it has fewer information requirements. So the idea is to really get the tool into the hands of policymakers, of park officials, of local World Bank and other people who may be interested in using the tool. We've really tried to make it in an easy to understand and easy to use and to make these kinds of multiplier estimates. So it can be also easily scaled up. So next slide, please. So here is a team from Uganda that I was working with. They're a fantastic team. And their enumerators, just like in your video, I saw people from your asset management going out and doing these. Perhaps they could teach others. But the idea was that we would contract with an independent data collection firm, not related to the Park Service, so that this research could be independent, and that the firm would then compile information about key actors in the local economy using simplified questionnaires on tablets. These questionnaires were only about 20 minutes long, 30 minutes long, targeting what you saw Professor Taylor show you, the lodges, not just the lodges and tourists and souvenir shops, but what about the retail shops, the salons, the carpentry shop that feeds into the local housing, or the people that work in some of these industries, or even that work outside of these industries, but as Professor Taylor pointed out, and as everyone pointed out, that receive the indirect benefits of these, of the tourist dollars. So again, we want to, basically you collect the information from these questionnaires. They go into the park official or the officials and the technical advisors in the ministries could then put this into the Excel or Google Sheets, and then it will automatically construct the Louis Light, and it can show you the multiplier effects of the protected area tourism. And it places, and we've also created with Professor Mateusz Filipski here, we've also created an online dashboard that can easily be used by policymakers. Next slide, please. So again, how can it be used? In a similar way, like we were showing you the more complex Louis model before, it showcases these linkages and distributed impacts of protected area tourism on lodges, restaurants, other local businesses, local agriculture, and poor and non-poor households. And so you're getting the idea of the local economy, similar again to the tool we used previously. Next slide. But once these values are generated on the dashboard, and I'll show you that in a bit, on the dashboard, you can start to experiment a little bit with this intervention, the tourism interventions, increasing these multiplier effects, or also complementary interventions that can be explored by policymakers. For example, what if a higher amount of agricultural produce is sourced by the tourism sector from local farmers? Well, we would expect the multipliers to increase, but how would they increase? Because more purchases are done from a local economy. How do jobs programs influence female employment? How can they complement tourism by increasing benefits to female households, female headed households, or households that have female employment, and so on. And not just, again, in the tourism sector, but all throughout the local economy. How can social cash transfers, for example, benefit poor households who may or may not receive the tourist dollar? So some do receive the money from tourism, but some may not, and may need the government to intervene. You can use the tool to look at the local economy and the impact of these cash transfers as well. And then, of course, how do these community projects
Justin, somehow you got muted.
The host is
There you
muting.
go.
Okay, sorry. And then how can community projects, so community revenue sharing and so on, how can they be used to increase the multiplied impact of tourism? Next slide. So again, as I pointed out, Professor Filipski and Professor Taylor and I myself, we've constructed this dashboard and allows you to use it. And we'll share the clickable link with you so you can play around with it. But what does a dollar spent have the impact? And as Phoebe pointed out, every dollar has, also in Uganda, has a more than dollar increase in the local economy. So that blue box, for example, says that every dollar in tourism spending in Uganda's Queen Elizabeth National Park creates $4.86 in total production value, or $1.75 in total GDP or income to the households. It's less than the production multiplier because some leaks out through buying inputs outside of the protected area. So again, this is the local economy around the protected area, and this is some of the multiplied effects. So more than $1 increase, as we've seen previously. Next slide. So we can see that tourism to this park creates large economic value. For example, every $100 increase in tourism, you can imagine an extra tourist, for example, just one additional tourist, spending an extra $100. And what would have that impact on the local economy? Well, we see that $486 is created in local business value. So again, this is the multiplied effect of that $100. And then $175 in extra household income because of that extra tourist that was attracted to the park. And then an increase of $75 in local wages. And then also, of course, the park earns money from them. So $23 in park income. And remember, this is not just the direct effects, but this is the indirect effects as well through the park hiring guards and so on. So this is the total direct and indirect impact on the local economy of that dollar, of that tourist spending. Again, government spending can also have a powerful impact on the local economy. For every $100 increase in park spending, it increases the local business value by $213, household income by $89, and worker wage income by $46. And we can also see from the graphs sort of a distribution of how these are impacted in the local economy. So, for example, we see in this case, you can see on the left hand, it says on production. On the left-hand side, those first three columns, tourism, restaurants, lodges, tourism-related activities are very small. The bars are small. But in the right hand, on that first graph in the left, you see those are large bars. These are the agriculture, non-agricultural sector, and so on. So this is the local economy in the area. So as Ed pointed out, as Professor Taylor pointed out, that these have large indirect increases in the economy, not just in the tourists. You can go on. And then you can look at local sourcing, as I mentioned. So an increase, $100 increase in local crop purchases increases non-crop production by $290. Household $43, and worker wage income by $110. So this is great if you can increase purchases from the local economy, and the tool helps you to see how those purchases impact income and production and labor. Training programs for local workers. I know that the World Bank is doing an amazing training program in Madagascar, having just been there. And this also can complement it, a training program to help move female workers, perhaps into tourism sector or into non-tourism sector, and it can increase income. So for every $100 of new wages to low-skilled female workers, it can raise local household income by $306. and wages to other worker groups have similar benefits. So again, this is the community surrounding the protected area of the Uganda Queen Elizabeth National Park. So thank you very much. I appreciate it for your time.
Thank you. And that sort of brings us to the conclusion of our presentation. Just to recap some of the key messages from what we presented. As I began this presentation, the protected areas are often seen as good for conservation, but not for economic development. And yet these protected areas can generate significant economic value for local communities. We have shown that an additional dollar spent by a park visitor raises local incomes by over $1 between $1.5 to $1.9. An additional dollar spent by government in these protected areas gives an economic return between $6 to $28 as per our study, and more than half of this value goes to poor households. Tools, we hope we have shown you that the tools such as Louis Life can help governments to make this kind of economic assessment, economic valuation more rapidly, and really most importantly, to use this information to do better planning, to inform how protected areas are managed, and to really then generate more economic value for local communities living around these protected areas. So thank you very, very much for your attention. And I turn it. And you can find more information about this report that we shared with you at this particular website. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih banyak kepada Urvashi, Profesor Taylor, Phoebe, dan Profesor Justin. Demikian sesi presentasi. Selanjutnya kita akan memasuki sesi diskusi dan tanggapan yang akan dimoderasi oleh Bapak Hari Sutarmin. Kepada Bapak Hari Sutarmin, waktu dan tempat kami persilakan.
Terima kasih Mbak Naris. Mohon izin Bapak Ibu semua. Perkenalkan, saya Hari Sutarmin yang akan memandu sesi tanya jawab ini. Sebelumnya saya sampaikan terima kasih kepada speaker ya, narasumber kita yang langsung dari USA, Bapak Ibu semua, rekan-rekan semua. Jadi kenapa webinar ini pagi ya, kalau kita jam 8 pagi, karena kita menyesuaikan dengan jadwal-jadwal beliau, dengan waktu beliau yang ada di USA. Jadi mohon pemahamannya sehingga kita selalu di pagi. Tidak memungkinkan juga nanti kesempatan berikutnya bisa jadi nanti di siang kalau nanti narasumbernya ada di Eropa ya Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih. Dalam sesi ini kita akan diskusi Bapak Ibu. Jadi nanti di sini hadir juga Pak Irzal dari Taman Nasional Gunung Halimun Salak dan juga Pak Rahmat Kurniawan atau Pak Kori, kita kenal sehari-hari dari Direktorat Penilaian. Nah mungkin pertama kita diskusi terkait dengan kedua tanggapan kita, kedua narasumber kita ini. Kita ingin lebih tahu lah apa tadi secara studi sudah disampaikan dari tim World Bank terkait dengan bagaimana sih suatu kawasan konservasi yang harus kita lindungi tetapi juga memberikan manfaat ya, tapi juga bisa membangun perekonomian. Jadi kalau kita lihat ini intisarinya dari SDGs ya, Sustainable Development Goals. Jadi bahwa 3P, planet, prosperity, dan people. Jadi masyarakat tidak serta-merta menggunakan planet ini untuk prosperity, untuk kemakmuran, tetapi juga kita lindungi planet ini sehingga anak cucu kita ke depan juga tetap bisa menggunakan atau menikmati alam ini sesuai dengan yang kita nikmati saat ini. Saya izin saya sapa Pak Irzal. Selamat pagi Pak Irzal. Selamat pagi Pak Irzal.
Ya, selamat pagi Pak.
Pagi Pak.
Mohon maaf ini saya lagi di Pelabuhan Ratu, jadi mungkin agak sinyalnya agak hilang-hilang timbul gitu ya.
Oh siap. Terima kasih Pak Irzal. Sebagai informasi Bapak Ibu semua, jadi bulan depan insya Allah kami dari Direktorat Penilaian berkolaborasi dengan KLHK dan juga dari disupport dengan World Bank akan menerapkan penilaian SDA alam yang ada hutan konservasi yang ada di Taman Nasional Gunung Halimun. Ya, mohon izin Pak Irsal ya, mohon support dan dukungannya sehingga kegiatan kita nanti bisa berjalan dengan lancar. Pak Irsal, mohon tanggapan Bapak, mohon tanggapan Bapak terkait dengan presentasi Pak, terus juga potensi-potensi apa sih yang bisa diangkat atau diambil sehingga bisa alam ini atau kawasan konservasi ini tetap lestari dan masyarakat sekitar atau komunitas yang menggerakkan suatu kawasan juga mendapatkan imbal hasil gitu Pak. Mungkin mohon Pak Irsal bisa menyampaikan pandangannya Pak.
Baik, terima kasih Pak. Ya, jadi gini Pak, selama ini kan kawasan konservasi kenal hanya dilindungi di segi pemanfaatannya Pak. Tetapi dalam koridor-koridor hukum boleh dimanfaatkan, tetapi ada hukum yang mengatur dan mengikat di situ Pak. Jadi di dalam kawasan nasional juga diberlakukan seperti itu. Pertama-tama kita memang perlu menginventarisasi potensi apa yang ada di dalam kawasan konservasi. Jadi bukan kawasan lindung Pak, seperti yang ada di slide sebelumnya, tetapi adalah kawasan konservasi. Sebenarnya dulu sudah ada sih inventarisasi, tetapi kita dalam rangka untuk mengupdate potensi-potensi yang ada, kita sudah membuat satu grid ya, ukuran 1 km kali 1 km terhadap seluruh kawasan yang seluas 115.000 hektar. Dalam 1 km itu sebenarnya ada apa gitu Pak. Ya, itu nanti kita terapkan di dalam zonasi-zonasi. Ada zonasi-zonasi dalam kawasan Taman Nasional, ada zona inti, zona rimba, zona pemanfaatan dan sebagainya. Nah, khusus untuk pemanfaatan itu kita blokkan semua di zona pemanfaatan. Berdasarkan hasil inventarisasi, kemudian berdasarkan pembagian dalam grid 1 km kali 1 km ada sekitar 1.205 grid ya. Nah, disitulah pemanfaatan dapat dilakukan, baik itu ada geotermal kah, atau izin wisata alam, atau sorry Pak, kemudian juga ada pemanfaatan sumber daya energi yang dari air dan sebagainya Pak. Semua ada aturan-aturannya, bahkan untuk kesejahteraan masyarakat yang kita bina, yang ada di dalam kawasan, yang sudah keterlanjuran, biasanya itu kita melalui mekanisme Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja, UCK, ada 15 kelompok tani hutan yang ada berada dalam kawasan, boleh melakukan kegiatan di situ, tetapi juga mereka harus melakukan pemulihan ekosistem, namanya kemitraan konservasi. Kemudian juga dalam rangka pemberdayaan masyarakat supaya masyarakat sejahtera juga dilakukan juga kesepakatan konservasi di area-area penyangga di sekitar kawasan konservasi kita. Itu kita berdayakan mereka boleh ke hutan, misalnya memungut hasil hutan bukan kayu, rotan, madu dan sebagainya, tetapi ada peraturan-peraturan yang mengikat kepada mereka. Mereka tidak boleh menebang pohon dan sebagainya. Sehingga hasil akhirnya sih sebenarnya Pak, jadi masyarakat itu sejahtera, ya, kemudian juga tetapi hutannya dapat terjaga. Mungkin seperti itu dulu Pak.
Terima kasih Pak Irsal. Izin Pak, jadi tadi intinya kan awalnya harus ada inventarisasi Pak ya. Dari inventarisasi tadi daerah-daerah mana yang bisa atau lokal mana yang bisa dilakukan pemanfaatan. Terus izin Pak, saya ingin menanyakan Pak, apakah penilaian itu sesuatu yang penting atau urgent dalam pengelolaan hutan Pak ya, untuk penilaian sumber daya alam hutan konservasi ini Pak. Sebagai informasi Pak, bahwasanya kami Direktorat Penilaian mempunyai 3 bidang penilaian Pak, jadi penilaian properti, bisnis, dan sumber daya alam. Nah, apakah dalam prakteknya memang dibutuhkan Pak terkait untuk penilaian sumber daya alam ini, selain untuk penyusunan neraca itu? Halo, izin Pak Irzal.
Oke Pak, saya setuju Pak dengan adanya penilaian yang akan dilakukan Pak. Jadi kami juga sebenarnya ingin tahu Pak, dalam suatu kawasan konservasi itu berapa sih sebenarnya ada sumber daya alam kita di dalam kawasan Taman Nasional Gunung Halimun Salak. Kita pernah invent ya, tetapi cuma belum sampai nilai rupiahnya Pak, tetapi potensinya saja. Karena kan mungkin bukan bagian saya, karena mungkin rumit sekali untuk menilai ya, bahwa kalau misalnya ada geothermal di situ, berapa penilaiannya, kemudian kalau ada macan tutul satwa liar yang dilindungi, berapa sih sebenarnya itu nilainya. Mungkin itu perlu kajian-kajian yang lebih mendalam lagi Pak, sehingga nanti mungkin bisa didapat berapa sih sebenarnya nilai dari sumber daya alam yang ada di dalam kawasan Taman Nasional Gunung Halimun Salak. Demikian Pak.
Siap, terima kasih Pak Irsyad. Saya izin ke narasumber kita yang kedua yaitu Pak Kori. Selamat pagi Pak Kori.
Selamat pagi Mas Ri, sehat. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Oke. Pak Kori, izin tadi dari WP sudah memberikan, tim WP sudah memberikan masukan atau ilmu ya bagi kita terkait dengan tadi ada LUI ya, terkait dengan kajian LUI di beberapa negara. Nah, saya ingin tanggapan dari Pak Kori ini Pak, terkait dengan kajian LUI yang sudah dilakukan oleh WP itu, bagaimana Direktorat Penilaian, apakah punya kajian ataukah memang ini bisa memberkaya atau nanti melengkapi kita Pak? Izin Pak Kori.
Baik, terima kasih Mas Ari. Pertama-tama saya ucapkan terima kasih dari tim pemapar tadi, Miss Urvasi dan rekan-rekan dari Amerika yang sudah memberikan kami insight yang luar biasa, menambah pemahaman kami terkait bagaimana melakukan penilaian kawasan konservasi ini. Tentu apa yang sudah dipaparkan tadi sangat-sangat berguna bagi kita Mas Ari dalam mengembangkan metodologi yang bisa kita gunakan dalam melakukan penilaian wilayah-wilayah konservasi. Sejatinya memang konsep yang sama sudah kita lakukan dalam penilaian infrastruktur, di mana kita melakukan kajian terkait dampak ekonomi bagi masyarakat sekitar dalam setiap pembangunan infrastruktur seperti jalan atau perkantoran yang ada di Indonesia. Cuma memang untuk kawasan konservasi memang belum pernah kita terapkan. Nah, ini skema ini tentunya bisa kita gunakan, apalagi tadi sudah ada semacam tools yang digunakan, mungkin itu akan bisa lebih aplikatif bagi kita dalam melaksanakannya dan lebih mempercepat prosesnya. Mungkin memang kendala kita dalam pelaksanaan penilaian sumber daya alam, khususnya yang kita praktekkan di Indonesia ini adalah waktu yang terbatas. Kita ke lapangan, kita mencari data, dan data ini memang menjadi hal yang krusial dalam penilaian ini. Tadi kalau saya lihat di dalam pemaparan, tim itu benar-benar melakukan kontak ataupun berkontrak dengan pihak tertentu ya di luar Taman Nasional untuk mencari data sehingga data yang didapatkan menjadi lebih baik. Nah, ini mungkin salah satu hal yang perlu kita pelajarin dan kita kerjasamakan dengan teman-teman di World Bank supaya nanti kalau setiap aplikasi kita dalam melakukan penilaian sumber daya alam ini juga bisa mendapatkan data seperti itu. Kemudian memang dari seluruh konsep yang ada, memang saya tadi sempat berpikir memang harus ada kesadaran terkait wisata di masyarakat. Ini memang menjadi salah satu hal negatif di Indonesia mungkin ya, tim dari Washington, bahwa di Indonesia masyarakatnya mungkin belum terlalu sadar akan wisata di beberapa tempat. Jadi mereka mungkin akan lebih merasa ingin menikmati alamnya, langsung mengambil sesuatu produk dari alamnya, bukan untuk diwisatakan. Jadi ketika ada wisatawan yang datang di sana malah terjadi hal-hal yang negatif di sana. Misalnya mereka wisatawan harus membayar lebih besar ataupun sesuatu yang mungkin di luar pemikiran, sehingga wisatawannya kemudian tidak berkenan lagi datang ke sana dan memberikan dampak negatif kepada wisata itu secara keseluruhan di daerah tersebut. Nah, ini memang perlu kerjasama pemerintah untuk memberikan kesadaran akan wisata kepada masyarakat di sekitar, sehingga metode-metode yang seperti ini bisa kita terapkan secara baik. Kalau tidak, mungkin akan sangat sulit kita mengukur dampak wisatawan tersebut ketika masyarakatnya sendiri tidak mendukung. Kemudian sebenarnya ini juga nanti bisa kita sinkronkan dengan apa yang di dalam program penyelenggaraan nilai ekonomi karbon. Ketika nanti pemerintah bisa melakukan upaya-upaya ini, mengetahui nilai dari suatu kawasan konservasi ini, maka tentunya pemerintah dapat melakukan perencanaan yang lebih baik, melakukan perencanaan anggaran, kemudian juga tentunya menetapkan pendapatan yang tepat, pendapatan negara bukan pajak secara yang tepat, sehingga itu mendorong ekonomi di wilayah sekitar, tetapi tetap juga menjaga alam, kelestarian alam itu sendiri. Memang ada beberapa kasus di Indonesia di mana kondisinya ketika kita meningkatkan ekonomi di sana, kawasannya menjadi tidak terjaga. Nah, ini mungkin kita tidak mau juga seperti hal itu. Ini tentu kalau misalnya nanti kita sandingkan dengan program penyelenggaraan nilai ekonomi karbon, di mana pelaku usaha maupun pemerintah daerahnya bisa kemudian kita berikan pemahaman terkait nilai ini, maka mereka tentunya mungkin akan memberikan kontribusi yang lebih besar dan dapat memberikan kebijakan, membuat kebijakan program kerja yang pro lingkungan tetapi juga meningkatkan ekonomi. Mungkin itu dari saya, Mas Ari.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Kori. Terus izin ya, jadi key-nya di sini kan kelestarian lingkungan. Nah, kalau di Indonesia ini kan kita bisa banyak belajar ya terkait dengan kawasan wisata, dan bukan saja konservasi. Jadi kita bisa belajar di Bali ya, izin Pak Kori. Jadi di Bali kan mereka mengutamakan mengedepankan tiga hal, terutama kelestarian lingkungan. Di Bali sangat lestari sekali lingkungannya dan dijadikan objek atau potensi wisata. Selain lestari wisata, juga budayanya juga diangkat di sana. Terus yang ketiga terkait yang tadi people-nya, mereka sangat hospitality. Jadi tiga ini, budaya, lestari lingkungan, dan juga masyarakat yang ramah, yang welcome dengan siapapun, itu mungkin sesuatu yang bagus. Dan pada ini kan dibentuk 9 Bali baru. Saya pernah berdiskusi dengan Bapeda Bali, apakah Bali nggak takut ini karena akan dibentuk 9 Bali baru? Oh enggak Mas, saya yakin pasti para wisman maupun wisatawan dalam negeri pasti akan mencari Bali yang asli gitu. Meskipun ada 9 Bali baru, 9 Bali yang asli pasti akan tetap dicari. Nah, kenapa Bali asli ini tetap dicari? Karena tadi kelestarian lingkungan. Jadi sama dengan tadi apa tema yang disampaikan di topik ini. Terus izin Pak Kori, tadi Pak Kori menyinggung-nyinggung terkait dengan nilai ekonomi karbon. Nah, dengar-dengar kan di Kalimantan Timur sudah ada pembayaran berbasis kinerja gitu Pak ya. Nah, seperti apa sih kontribusi atau kolaborasi, mungkin kita di sini juga punya teman-teman penilai di daerah yang bisa membantu mensupport berkolaborasi dengan pemerintah daerah sehingga bisa mengcapture, mengikuti apa yang dilakukan oleh pemerintah Kalimantan Timur dalam rangka tadi nilai keuntungan pembayaran berbasis kinerja. Mungkin seperti apa Pak ya yang bisa dilakukan oleh pemerintah daerah maupun dari teman-teman penilai Pak?
Baik, terima kasih Mas Ari. Untuk mendapatkan pembayaran berbasis kinerja dalam skema penyelenggaraan nilai ekonomi karbon, memang pemerintah daerah maupun pelaku usaha lingkungan di sekitar itu memang harus membuktikan bahwa mereka memiliki kontribusi terhadap pencapaian NDC, National Development Carbon ya, penurunan nilai karbon. Sehingga mereka harus melakukan perencanaan, melakukan inventarisasi, dan kemudian melakukan upaya-upaya mitigasi dan adaptasi terhadap perubahan iklim, sehingga mereka kemudian dinyatakan memiliki kontribusi terhadap penurunan emisi karbon. Nah, dalam pembuktian itulah tentunya penilai bisa berkontribusi dengan menyajikan, melakukan menganalisis lingkungan yang ada, berapa nilainya, sehingga hasil kajian mereka bisa memperkaya proposal yang diberikan oleh pemerintah daerah kepada pihak-pihak terkait untuk pembayaran berbasis kinerja. Nah, ini intinya nanti Mas Ari, pemerintah daerah jika ingin dibantu untuk menyusun proposal dalam penyelesaian pendapatan pembayaran berbasis kinerja ini bisa saja menghubungi KPKNL setempat, kantor-kantor vertikal Direktorat Jenderal Kekayaan Negara, sehingga kita bisa bekerja sama untuk melakukan penilaian sumber daya alam khususnya wilayah konservasi ini, sehingga dapat membuktikan keikutsertaan mereka dalam program penurunan emisi karbon. Mungkin itu Mas Ari.
Siap, terima kasih Pak. Ini konservasi bukan cuma hutan darat aja Pak ya?
Betul, termasuk kelautan ya, pakai blue carbon.
Ya, terima kasih Pak. Bapak Ibu hadirin semua, ini kita masih ada waktu dan banyak sekali ini pertanyaan kepada speaker kita dari tim Urvasi dan tim. Mungkin kita masuk ke pertanyaan yang diajukan oleh teman-teman di kolom chat ya. Mungkin yang pertama ini dari Mbak Ina Pranoto, Pak Ina Pranoto ini. Jadi bertanya ke
Ibu Pak.
Maaf Bu. Jadi ada pertanyaan dari Bu Ina ini kepada dari Urvasi dan tim. Mungkin Bu Ina, pagi Bu. Mungkin Urvasi dan bisa merespon ya. Jadi apa mau disampaikan langsung Bu Ina?
Thank you. Terima kasih ya Pak.
Thank you very
very
much.
much.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm also working in a bank as a consultant, but it's not in the tourism. So I would like to ask, is there any maybe friends in World Bank Washington study related to the impact of this ecotourism in the local culture, local behavior? Because I think it's very important also when it was like accessed by outsider. So I'm sure that will be some kind of interaction. Like for example, in Bali, I understand now the young people, it's really a bit different with the older one. Maybe also, I don't know, in Kenya, maybe Maasai, I don't know. But basically, is there any study conducted already in under the World Bank related to this social culture or social? Thank you. That's a very simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Ina. Maybe from Urvasi, you can answer the question from Bu Ina.
Thank you very much for that question. Unfortunately, our study really focused on understanding, the economic value that the tourism in the protected area brings to the local economy, and we didn't. And I'm unfortunately not aware of any other study that looks at the impact of tourism on the social behavior. We felt that we needed to bring attention to the fact that protected areas can serve as an engine of economic development. And so, but your concerns are right, absolutely, that they can have unintended impacts as well. It can lead to the impact on the environment. It can lead to impact on society as well. But the fact is that protected areas are often in parts of the country where there's very few other economic opportunities. And so we wanted to really focus on the development aspects of protected areas, and then make sure that the focus is on how do you reduce poverty in these local communities through better tourism, and to make the case to policymakers that it's really important to invest in these. And I just wanted to, I was listening to the conversation and the interaction, and I just wanted to make one intervention if that's okay. I heard a lot about protected areas and I heard a lot about communities. But what I didn't share very much about is the private sector. Because unless you have really good tourism offerings, and some of the questions that were coming and we were trying to answer in the chat was that unless these protected areas are accessible, unless these protected areas provide good tourism services, so there's good, trails inside the protected areas, good visitor centers, but also hotels and other sort of services that the tourists want. Without that, you're not going to see tourists, you're not going to see economic benefit for the local community. So this aspect of, really growing and diversifying the tourism sector is equally important to keeping in mind the protection of the conservation of the protected area, keeping in mind the benefits to the communities. But unless you have a thriving tourism sector, none of this economic benefit will come. So it's really important to also focus on the private sector and how do you bring them in a way that they don't damage the environment, but how do you bring them in to create a vibrant tourism sector is also very important. I just wanted to also reflect a little bit on that aspect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fasi. Is that clear, Bu Ina? Or
Oh, thank you, Pak.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah. Okay, for second,
Terima kasih.
I will invite Mas Duca ya. Hello, Mas Duca. Maybe you can ask direct to the Urvasi team. Mungkin Mas Duca. Halo. Okay. Someone want to ask direct to the Urvasi? Pak Jerry. Okay, Mas Jerry. Monggo Mas Jerry. You can ask for Urvasi team.
Thank you very much, Pak Hari. I'm Jerry from DGSM, Directorate of Valuation. There's kind of I like the conversation from Ms. Urvasi and in how to edit some. I mean, this Indonesian forest is likely the state assets, just like a state asset, and in how to edit public sector or private sector to increase tourism, it will be interesting. And in your opinion, or maybe to the panelists, by introducing the local economy-wide impact evaluation, this any proportion from public and private to in how to manage, I mean, just like a local agricultural household communities, or even for the sustainable issues, and even for in how to empowerment against poverty. Because from the presentation, I think the crucial factor in the movie is to formulate the amount of fees and taxes. And since the private sector, you put it to edit in the formula, this kind of
Mas Jerry, sorry, you can ask for short question. We have a lot of
okay.
Okay,
thank you. Maybe Ms. Urvasi can get what I want to say in how to formulate the fees and taxes, and we put it divided in public and private sector, and add it to the Lewis formula. Thank you very much.
Maybe I could request Professor Taylor or Professor Pagan to answer that. I mean, we only gave you a glimpse of this blue light, and I think there was a request in the chat for us to share more information on the blue light. And I don't know if somebody has already done that. I was requesting Professor Taylor or Professor Hipsky to just add. And you'll see that it requires a lot of different types of data. to estimate, but we have tried to make it, the tool is very easy to use. And, you know, it also walks you through, and it includes, for example, information on taxes. I don't know, Justin or Ed, if you want to answer this more. There is definitely information required for the estimation in terms of what taxes are collected. Ed, would you like to come in on this?
Sure. So the reason that we have been developing the Louis Light tool, I mean, we already had done these 4 country studies in 5 national parks, using a more elaborate, very data-intensive Louis tool, local economy-wide impact evaluation tool. And that was a proof of concept, but it also gave us some very detailed insights into how tourism to protected areas affects local economies. After we finished that study, which we all believed was a very useful thing to do, we began talking to each other and asking, okay, so how can we scale this up? How can we make this accessible to other countries, other sites, easily train people in those countries to collect the information and to enter the information and then to use the Louis Light tool. Now, to simplify the tool in this way does require making assumptions. I mean, it is a less flexible tool than the more elaborate Louis models that we developed in previously. But its great advantage is that it's a quick response kind of tool. You can fairly quickly collect the information. Our goal was to minimize the number of questions you have to ask visitors, lodges, local businesses, the park authorities, local farmers, and so forth. And so the data can be collected much more quickly and entered very easily onto this platform, which then automatically generates the social accounting matrix and the multipliers very, very quickly. Of course, that requires these additional assumptions. And so there are 2 different routes to try to measure these sorts of impacts. That said, we think that it is worth it to consider using the Louis Light tool, at least as a kind of broad brush way of sort of first cut at understanding what impacts of protected area tourism on local economies might be, and how to increase the economic value that this tourism creates. And so we feel that we will continue working on this, but we think we have now a tool that is quite accessible and can provide much more information than we've had access to before when we design national parks and ways of managing those national parks.
Just to add, Ed, I for the local taxes, we did look in Madagascar. We looked at the local government because the local government makes tourist investments. So we made sure that in our short questionnaire to the local government, we asked about their use, and then we asked the different activities in the sector about local taxes. So that was sort of taken into consideration. Not sure if it helps answer the question, but just wanted to add.
That's a great point. When we revised this instrument in these first applications in Zambia and also now in Madagascar to try to refine it. And so when you go out and you put this to the test in practice, you learn that, I mean, a one-size-fits-all approach is not always useful. And you know, in the African setting, when we talked about taxes, when the people talk about taxes, this is revenue that is going to the central government, not to a local government. But then in Madagascar, we found, oh, well, there are really 2 governments that we need to have in this model, the national government and the local government. The national government, if it wishes, can take park entry fees and use them for other things, remove them from the local economy, whereas the local government is receiving tax revenue from local businesses and households and spending that money locally. And so there's a very important distinction that we had to make in the case of Madagascar. One of the great advantages of the Louis Light modeling approach is
Ed,
that
Ed,
it
can
isn't
I'm
difficult.
sorry, I'm going
Oh,
to
sorry.
cut you off because
Okay, no.
I know you can see that Professor is a professor. And so when
Sorry
he
about that.
takes on a question, he gives you a very long answer. But we have a lot of questions from other participants, so I will turn back to Bakhari. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no, that's fine. I deserved it.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Mas Jerry, is enough. I invite Mr. Hendra Irawan to ask for the speaker. Hello, Mr. Hendra Irawan, are you there?
Yes, I am in.
Oh,
Okay, thank you,
okay.
Mr. Hari. I think my question is already answered by Urvashi, but I want to know the detail about the administrative consequences in the 4 country models that World Bank have evaluated in the PA or tourism protected areas. So what are the examples of unintended questions that arrive or in the 4 country model in the studies?
Sorry, I didn't get your question. What is the? Could you repeat the question?
So I mean, I want to get the detail of the unintended consequences.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
What
Yes.
of the
Yes.
study of the 4 countries that the study that World Bank has concluded?
I mean, as we were explaining, what we have tried to do is to take a snapshot of when in this particular protected area, what is when a tourist comes to the protected area, what are the different sort of impacts. Now, so we, in order to do that, you have to understand both the indirect and the direct effect. Now, in terms of unintended consequences, some of the unintended consequences can be sort of deterioration of the natural park, and even the question that was raised earlier, sort of consequences on perhaps the community or the culture. But we did not, unfortunately, as part of our study, look into those aspects. We were very much focused on the economic development aspects of tourism in the protected area. But really to understand, I think Professor Taylor said this earlier, oftentimes when you think of the benefit of tourism, you think in terms of the very narrow, direct benefit, right? What is the tourist benefit? But to really expand it to show that that's not really the only benefit. It has this multiplier, and we wanted to listen. Back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mas Hendra and Ursafi. And then maybe Mbak Rizka. Mbak Rizka, you can ask the Ursafi and team. Time and screen is yours, Mbak Rizka. Halo, Mbak Rizka. Rizka Hutami.
Yes, Pak Hari.
Okay.
Is my voice clear, Pak Hari? Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Probably my question is already, some of my question is already explained in the chat box, but probably I would like to understand even more the Louis Light model. So it is kind of, Mr. Edward already explained that the Louis Light model is different things to use and to measure compared to the 2 methods that we usually use in natural resources valuation. So my question is that, so what are the key components and variable used in the Louis Light model, and compared to the other method of valuation, how much we need to spend the time to do this valuation if we use the Lewis Light model. Thank you very much.
Let me get that started and then I'll request others to come in as well. So, so this tool that we're developing that will allow you to use this Louis Light, right, a more simplified version. This will be available freely. We're also creating a lot of training material, and we'll be providing training as well for the use of this tool. So in the sense that I think at that point you'll get a better understanding. The basic, of course, Professor Taylor and Professor Lipsky can explain this better, but it's a computer general equilibrium model that lies behind this kind. But that sometimes takes a lot of data and effort to estimate, and therefore we have tried to develop this simplified tool. But Ed, Mateus, would you like to come in?
Mateus, it might be good if you said a few things about to give people a sense of how simple this is. I'm wondering, Urvashi, would this be a good time to click on the platform and show say one or two of the data collection instruments, and you'll see how few questions there are that need to be answered to make this happen. I don't have that link handy, but Mateus.
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely, I think that would be fantastic. I'm just concerned about the time. Right. Maybe Pak Hari, we are very happy to share much more information about this and even have a more bilateral conversation. But I think at this time, it would be yet another presentation practically. And maybe this is, but
Agreed.
let's share it. I think you've shared it in the chat, no?
Also, well, it's in the PowerPoint as well. And we have a link there.
Yeah, let me just say I shared the link to the dashboard that Justin was talking about. I shared that in the chat. There's a data tab that you can look at. It won't be obvious exactly what's going on in there right away because the equations are hidden in the background, but the questions and the data that is necessary, you can get a good idea of that by clicking around. I think the question was actually relating to the difference also between why Louis is different from contingent valuation. I think it's a really important distinction to make. Contingent valuations tries to put a value on the non-monetary or the non-market assets, right? It tries to invent a value for things that don't have a value. We're not trying to do that. Louis is market-based. It's just what it does is it looks at the spillover impacts, the secondary impacts, the impacts that are ignored, that are usually ignored. So it's a very different thing that we're trying to measure. It's not trying to give the overall value like contingent valuation tries to do. It's not trying to give an intangible value. It's very much tangible. And I think I'll stop here because of time.
Bakari, I think it would be worth just having a quick look, just a 10-second little teaser of the website. If we could just bring that up. Naris has it. In fact, I can just show it here. Perhaps we take another question, whilst we also put up the website on the screen. I can show it here.
Oh, sorry. Okay, maybe next, another question, maybe Mas Fikri?
And maybe whilst the question...
Fikri Butori.
Oh, can you see that?
Bisa sambil share pun bisa nanya. Oh. Okay, David, you can go on.
David, you want Mateus, maybe?
Yes, Mateus, do you want to just say just a 10-second overview of what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so in 10 seconds, this is exactly the page that you should be looking at. In these little tabs that say tourists, ag, non-ag tourism, you see questions and the answers in there. And so these data points that you see, this is what was used to build the model. How the model is built is not shown. That happens in the background. But if you can read the questions and you can see what's going on. I'm not going to go over them, but overall, what they are budget shares. You know, how much are you spending on this? How much are you spending on that? What is the cost? You know, how much is the cost of an entrance to the park, etc. So there's simple values that we try to get from our surveys, and all the questions you see here are actually correspond to the data inputs that we need to make the model. And then this is the output. Right? On the other side, that's what you actually look at once the multipliers get calculated. The instructions take a little bit of time to load. Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you.
I would only add that we are working on a manual to concisely explain how to do this sheet by sheet.
And the server is crashing right now because I think a lot of people have clicked on it at the same time, but eventually it'll be on a more powerful server.
Okay, we can go to another question.
Thank you.
Maybe this is the last question I will give to Mbak Lanasari. Lanasari. I invite you, Lanasari.
Yes, Pak Hari. All the questions.
Okay, yes.
All the questions are already
Maybe
answered.
to Mas Gumilang. Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Gumilang Wicaksono.
Pak Hari, maybe my question just answered in the chat box, but my concern is we have a lot of species endangered animal like owa Jawa, elang Jawa, Sumatran tiger. We must guarantee the conservate it to continuously to guarantee the seeing of our next generation, but still making a value added for economic purpose. That's all for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mas Gum. Maybe you make a statement of conclusion. Time is 9:47. Can we have one question again? Maybe to everyone is done. Mas Alip, maybe you have any question for the speaker, please? I have one speaker again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pak Hari, for the opportunity. I just want to ask a short question. How long does it take to implement the Louis model? I mean, the Louis Light or the full Louis model? Because sometimes we in directorate of evaluation, sometimes when we go to the site, we only have like restricted times up to like 7 days. The maximum like 5 to 7 days. I mean, is it the proper time to collect the data and also to survey the locals? Thank you.
Justin, I wonder if you can say how long it took to collect the data. What is, kind of the time spans that are likely?
Sure. I think 7 days is short, but it's not too much shorter. There's it's taken about 2 weeks to a little bit longer. So at each site, but I would say also if you have a higher number of people, you could easily split the teams into different groups to measure the different activities because they're not. That could be done as well to reduce the amount of time, but it's not that much longer than those days that you have. So that's what I would tell you. And that was using about 4 enumerators or 4 or 5 enumerators per site.
Okay, thank you, Justin.
Thank you. Prof. Taylor and Justin. Okay, mohon maaf termute. Nah, sesi diskusi sudah selesai Bapak Ibu jam 9:50 waktu Indonesia Barat. Saya serahkan selanjutnya ke Mbak Naris. Monggo Mbak Naris, saya kembalikan ke Mbak Naris. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih banyak kepada Pak Hari dan seluruh panelis dan penanya hari ini. Tutupan dari Pak Hari tadi menandakan bahwa sesi diskusi telah selesai dan sekarang kita akan memasuki sesi penutup oleh Bapak David Kachan, Senior Economist dari Bank Dunia. Kepada Bapak David Kachan, waktu dan tempat dipersilakan.
Thank you, Naris. Thank you, Pakari, and good morning to everyone. Always a pleasure to get together with you all and have an opportunity for such a in-depth discussion on topics which I think we're all very passionate about. So, look, I wanted to say just very quickly in closing, I wanted to share a question that I received once when I was doing some travels. So when I first moved to Indonesia, which was a year ago, I had the opportunity to go to Kerinci National Park on the far west of Jambi. And as I'm sure those of you who have been there know, it's a magnificent place. I didn't see the famous Sumatran tiger, but I did see the giant trees, the mountains, Mount Kerinci, and then the landscape. And then on the way home, we had the opportunity to stop off in a town nearby, and we're speaking to an official from Sungai Henu, the town, and that official said, he said, the national park takes up 60% of our district, but I have no idea what we get for it. And at the time, I wasn't quite sure what to say or what could be said about a question like that. Why is it that what does the national park represent to that district? But I think with the work that we've seen today would provide an answer to that official's question. And I would love to one day go back and be able to say, well, we could work out what it is that this very large national park does for your district. And what it made me reflect on a bit is about how in a country which is as diverse and complex as Indonesia, where there are multiple layers of government and very specialized government agencies, like in many big countries, with all that complexity, there needs to be a lot of people to agree on something before it happens, because there are so many stakeholders. And for that agreement to come about, there's a need for persuasive information and an understanding of what's at stake. And I think that generating of persuasive information is what the opportunity is with valuation and valuation techniques like this. And I think that's why Pak Alu, the Vice Minister for Environment and Forestry, as well as Pak Riono, the DG, I think that's why they've brought us together with this initiative between MOF, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, and the bank, as well as other stakeholders, to try and generate some of that persuasive information, a deeper understanding of value, which can help align people, not just within government, not just inside and outside government, but to other levels of government and right down to the community, so that things can get done. So, as always, I like to finish these sessions by saying, where do we go next? So we've had a chance to learn about a new method. I think that's been, I hope, productive and instructive to many of you. It's worth putting this in some context about our bigger engagement. I'm struggling with my screen share, apologies. I'm going to share one very quick slide. It should now be on your screen. But as you will know, we have this engagement, which we're very pleased to be part of. It's evaluating and realizing the value of nature in Indonesia. And it's a joint initiative between our ministries and us here at the bank to explore ecosystem values. And so what is it that we're trying to do next. There's a few different pieces of these activities. First of all, we're very pleased to be supporting the upcoming valuation pilot study in Halimun Salak National Park. So we're looking forward to planning out what are some of the specific values that the team will be looking at, and thinking through what are some of the policy questions that can be answered with the answers from this study. So we match the right tool to the right question. So I think that's probably one important next step in this engagement. An additional follow-up step will be our value mapping study. So looking at how these values of not just tourism, but other ecosystem services, carbon, water, disaster risk management, timber, how they value over the landscape. Can we find the places in Indonesia where these values are highest? Can we find the areas in Indonesia where these values are at risk? And can we find the areas where there's opportunities to safeguard and enhance those values, particular locations? So that's part of the study that will be commencing with our colleagues from MOF and from MOEF. We'll continue with our webinar series, so we look forward to seeing you back for sessions like this one. And please let us know if you have feedback on what you want to hear, of course. And then in terms of the practical application, it's one thing to measure something, it's another thing to be able to realize value and direct financing towards those values. So we're working with our colleagues at MOEF. We're pleased to be able to support MOEF and MOF through the Indonesia Environment Fund in discussions around a conservation financing instrument, particularly a conservation endowment fund. It's been a goal of IEF and MOF for a while, and MOEF to develop such a fund. So if we have the opportunity through this engagement to support the development of a conservation financing instrument, which starts to channel money towards the areas where we're quantifying and discovering value, I think that would be an excellent outcome. So in closing, that's where we're going. We look forward to having your participation in these activities. Let me just thank our speakers for their time and expertise. It's really a privilege to have you here. Thank you to Urvashi, to Ed, to Justin, Matthew, and Phoebe. And of course, thanks very much to Pak Arik, Pak Jeffrey for opening remarks and for bringing us together. And let me thank my colleagues Naris, Early, Danis behind the scenes, bringing all the pieces together. So have a good day. Looking forward to seeing you next time. Back to you, Naris.
Terima kasih banyak Pak Dikit atas pidato penutupnya yang sangat bermakna. Dan untuk mengakhiri webinar hari ini, izinkan saya mengakhiri webinar dengan sebuah pantun.
Nice.
Menteri Keuangan Ibu Sri Mulyani.
Cakep.
Cukup 4 rakaat. Sekian webinar penilaian hari ini, semoga materinya bermanfaat. Sekali lagi terima kasih banyak. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Santi Santi Om, Nama Budaya, salam kebajikan. Terima kasih banyak semuanya.
Terima kasih semuanya. Thank you
Terima kasih,
so
David.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Fasi, Taylor. Thank you.
Makasih ya Mbak Naris. David, thank you. Edward, Matthias, Bobby Spencer. Okay, thank you so much.
It was great being here. Thanks to all of you.
See you later.
Thank you.
See you.